Ignatius Press and the Augustine Institute present the Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter. If you like us, please help us by subscribing and by reviewing us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you might listen. And don't forget to sign up for weekly updates and study questions at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.
Welcome back to the Formed Book Club, where Joseph Pearce, Vivian Dudro, and I, Father Fessio, discuss American Pilgrimage, a historical journey through Catholic life in a new world by Christopher Shannon. We are in the third part of this three-part book. We are in the third part of a three-part chapter called Ordinary Time. We've discussed peace, justice, and peace. And now we discuss life, the life issues. And our discussions are more lively on this, I think, because we have lived through part of it ourselves. And as I said in the previous session, we and the author are not far away enough from this history to see it in its clear outlines. And so there's more room for disagreement and discussion. So let's move on to the life issues. Who wants to start there? Anybody? I'm going to start on page 470, so there must be something before that, right?
Well, I've highlighted the passage of 466, but I really feel up to a point that I'm overshadowed. But both of you lived through this, and I didn't. So I really feel to a point I should step aside. But I've highlighted 466. So the paragraph here for the new paragraph. The tumultuous years following the Second Vatican Council saw the Church in America split into hostile warring camps on issues ranging from the liturgy to birth control. Even so, journals from the conservative wanderer, and I like the fact he put it in inverted commas, the conservative wanderer to the liberal commonweal were of one mind in opposition to abortion. And he carries on giving information there. At least here, first, there was, there was no one breaking ranks on abortion. And I think up to a point, that's still true. I think that even liberal Catholics, at least those in positions of authority, such as bishops, are scared to not toe the party line on abortion, even if they. So that's why I heard there's a vote at the USCCB a few years back, and about a third of the bishops voted to downgrade the importance of abortion. In other words, yeah, we're still opposed to it, but let's not talk about it as much. And about a third raised their hands. So I think there was a dissenting minority of bishops who would like to brush abortion under the carpet and move on. But the point is, for the most part, that the Catholic Church is holding firm on that issue, not on other issues, but on that issue.
Well, I think even that third, I believe virtually all the bishops would fully agree that abortion is always, in every case, immoral and wrong and a crime. Should be a crime. However, some bishops are saying there's other things which may be even worse. I mean, in terms of the spiritual damage, or at least should be given a lot more attention, like poverty and repression and racism and so on. And so they are opposed to making the Catholic Church a one-issue organization. So, yeah. But I doubt there's any Catholic bishops that would, even in their heart, think that abortion would be permitted.
Right.
Good to know.
The pivotal moment politically for, here the Democratic Party was basically a creation of the Catholic immigrant church. And the pivotal moment that gave Catholic Democratic politicians cover on this issue was Mario Cuomo's famous speech at the University of Notre Dame. I watched it on television live when he gave this "I'm personally opposed but" language. And everyone who wanted the political expediency took that line and went with it. But he was the one, here the son of Italian Catholic immigrants to the United States, governor of New York.
What it's worth, Vivian, Tony Blair, around the time of his own conversion, said exactly the same thing. I'm personally opposed, but...
Right, but this was before Tony Blair.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying that the line, having been established, is being followed.
It went around the world. It was the shot heard around the world.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. It really, that was a pivotal moment. I remember watching that speech and going, "Oh boy, this is a game changer now."
It's relativism. It's relativism because basically, my own personal view is merely an opinion. Other people have other opinions. It's basically a surrender to relativism, right? Abortion is something we can all disagree on, and it's like everything else. There's not an absolute truth about it. We just have opinions.
Yeah, on page 470, new paragraph, he says the election of Ronald Reagan established the Republican Party as the anti-abortion party. He keeps saying anti-abortion here, but he doesn't say pro-abortion. It's true that we are against abortion, but it's because we're for the life of the unborn. We're pro-life. That's what we are.
Yeah.
So anyway, I didn't like the fact that
I see. It's a negative adjective. I agree.
But in the middle of the page there, he refers to Reagan's appointment of Sandra Day O'Connor to the court in 1981 began a pattern of frustration and betrayal. And our friend, Vivian's and mine and ours, Judge Bill Clark, now deceased, was a wonderful, wonderful judge, person, a close advisor to Reagan. He was the one that made Reagan pro-life, basically. There's a long story behind that. But he was also very modest. That he's one of the few high officials in D.C. that left the D.C. after his term was up, didn't do lobbying, didn't become on a board of directors. No, he went back to his ranch in Southern California here. But Reagan wanted him to be the replacement for who it was now, and on the Supreme Court. And he demurred. He said, "No, I don't think I'm the best candidate. I want to go back to my family, in my ranch." And so that was when Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed, and then she disappointed in that she was conservative on most issues, but on this issue, she was not right thinking. Let's put it that way.
And that little episode should be another one of those reminders why we can't place our hope in the political realm. Because Judge Clark himself interviewed Sandra Day O'Connor and recommended her for the court.
That's right. That's right.
And you're probably never going to get a more devoted Catholic principled politician ever again in Washington. And yet he is the one who got O'Connor onto the court. And so it just shows you that, the political just can't fix all these problems. We got to do the best we can, but to think that, well, if we just get the right person in power, we just get the right party.
I also think I love that turn of phrase he uses there. We've criticized Christopher Shannon quite rightly for maladroit use of words and terms such as anti-abortion, but this began a pattern of frustration and betrayal that will continue for the next 35 years, because that's exactly, I think, that pro-life people thought about the Republican Party. They wheel out their pro-life credentials at election time, right? They get elected, at least in large part because of the pro-life vote, and then put the whole pro-life thing to one side till the next election and bring it out again. They do nothing about it when they're actually in power.
Well, and he refers to, in the same paragraph, of the Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision, 1992, which is one of the most abominable decisions ever could be written by any Supreme Court. And the person who wrote the opinion was a Catholic, Anthony Kennedy. And it included this incredible expression that at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of the universe, of meaning, of human life. What?
Yeah.
I mean, if you can define your own concept of meaning, well, then what's the Supreme Court for? What is civil society for? What is discourse for? We can't even talk to each other.
This is the issue, the problem, the conundrum. These people aren't Catholics. He's basically just said that you're God, right? The ultimate right is for you to be your own God and to define the cosmos according to your own principles.
Yeah.
That's not just non-Catholic. It's the antithesis of Catholicism. It's diabolical. So at what point? And we call people Catholics because they were baptized Catholics or raised Catholics. But when is someone not a Catholic anymore? Someone's not a Catholic anymore. They don't believe what the Catholic Church teaches.
But, he was pious, I understand, and went to Mass on Sundays, this and that, and probably was a Knight of Columbus, I don't know. But the right to define one's own concept of the universe? What? Talk about the triumph of total self-refuting subjectivity.
Yep.
Right.
There you have it. But that's written by and agreed to by the majority of the wise men of our society.
Yep.
The pinnacle of legal knowledge and experience. I'm sorry, it does lead one to have less confidence in one's civil superiors.
And it's that relativist absolutism,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's the one half of the term contradicts the other.
Right. Yeah, it's an oxymoron.
It's an oxymoron, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a moron too.
But this whole section is full of all these bizarre twists and turns. Like on page 469, he says, given its traditional sympathy for population control, the Republican Party seemed at first a poor alternative for pro-life Catholic Democrats. And that's exactly right. Here, the party of the little guy, pro-life Democrats, the working man, the poor, and now they turn their back on the unborn, and the Republican Party seems to be the party that cares. And yet the Republican Party had been in bed, no pun intended, with Planned Parenthood since the beginning. Goldwater, who was considered, the Republican golden boy in his time, he and his wife founded Planned Parenthood in their state. And so and Reagan himself, like Father Fessio mentioned, Judge Clark is the one who convinced Reagan to change his view on abortion. But too bad Reagan had already signed into law California pro-abortion law that became one of the most liberal laws in New York.
And again, the irony is here. I suspect this unholy alliance between conservatives and liberals is the conservatives, were taking the Sanger approach. That abortion gets rid of unwanted poor people, black people,
right.
Hispanics. It basically weeds out of the population those who are a problem anyway.
That's right.
I mean, and so this is why the conservatives are in bed with the liberals, because they want to abort to get rid of certain sections of the population. One other thing, I talk about strange bedfellows on page 471 here, because this is something I want to say. I think it's a positive outcome of all of this. That new paragraph: politics makes strange bedfellows, as the saying goes. Politically active pro-life Catholics found themselves increasingly in alliance with an erstwhile enemy, evangelical Protestants. And I actually think that's one of the very good things that's arisen out of this.
Yes.
Is that all of our efforts to be ecumenical, right? To bring Christians together into one fold against the devil, have failed. And yet God himself, if you like, in his providence, brings us together by presenting Christians of all stripes with an evil so abominable that we have to close ranks. And I really think this is one of the great blessings of the pro-life movement, is it's really got rid of that knee-jerk bigotry, which was a problem of the previous century.
Well, and let me give you a little anecdote here on page 4, related to page 472. It refers here to Operation Rescue in Randall Terry. And I and many others are Ignatius were part of Operation Rescue. We've been in jail together, But I was asked to come and speak in Los Angeles. There was a big pro-life conference down there. Several thousand people, maybe a couple thousand in this auditorium. And they had a Jew, a Catholic, and an evangelical. I forget who the Jew was. I was a Catholic. Randall Terry was a Protestant, evangelical. So we spoke. And Randall Terry, I have to say, it was phenomenal presentation. I mean, he was sitting at a keyboard, and kind of playing background music, and he was then giving his talk, almost like a poem. And he quoted this psalm. This is a pro-life thing about abortion, right? He quoted the psalm about a man having arrows in his quiver, namely children, And he's playing, you know something? We're in a battle. You don't want to have arrows in your quiver? You want to contracept? I mean, it was a pro-life anti-contraception speech by an evangelical Protestant. I wept at the time. In fact, I just saw him this summer and brought that up again. I said, Randall, thank you for that. That was a beautiful moment. But as you say, Joseph, it was a great ecumenical, it still is a great ecumenical impetus here, the pro-life movement. It is to this day.
It's God bringing good out of evil is what it is.
Yep. And a shout out is deserved for Father John Newhouse,
Yes.
the Lutheran minister who started First Things magazine precisely to be a place where people of different stripes of faith, but a common honoring of God and truth and life and dignity and all these things could have a forum to write and hear one another and respond to one another. And it was, as we know, Father Newhouse then became a Catholic eventually, but when he started First Things, he was still a Lutheran. And that was a big, big step in this whole congealing of people of like mind on these topics to work together in ways they hadn't before.
I have some more bones to pick here, page 472 towards the bottom. In politics, fidelity to the church's teaching on life too often meant abandonment of the church's teaching on nearly every other social issue. Give me a break, will you? Conservative Catholics defended their position by claiming the church's teaching on peace and economic life is merely advisory, a matter for prudential judgments made by individuals guided by an informed conscience. This defense reflects not only deficient understanding of the teaching authority of the church, but perhaps more troubling, blindness regarding the compromises the pro-life movement was making with respect to teachings that it claimed to accept as non-negotiable. That is completely wrong. Well, it's right when he says that we made the distinction between judgments which are prudential, upon which loyal, faithful Catholics can disagree, and judgments which are about morally intrinsic evil. But that's not, we didn't abandon the teachings.
No, and I too, Father, was disappointed with that section. And also where he went with it in saying that Catholics maintained a conspicuous silence on the issue of contraception. He says this on 473.
Yeah.
And, not everything that's immoral needs to be illegal, but some things are so immoral that they need to be illegal. And those are the things we need to prioritize in politics. And it doesn't mean that because they were silent on contraception that the Catholics in the pro-life movement were just as dedicated to church teaching on that too. It's just they're trying to save lives and stop bloodshed, and that is their priority. And if that means making alliances with people who maybe disagree on contraception, so be it. I mean, the focus was stopping the bloodshed, stopping this horrendous victimization also of women in crisis situations, being exploited for money and political usage. I mean, that's what we were trying to stop. And so to say that because there was a silence on this other thing, we somehow capitulated, that's not necessarily true at all.
Right. No, in the middle of the page, he said, still, pro-life Catholics who insisted that no Catholics could responsibly vote for a pro-abortion candidate made no such judgments regarding candidates who supported the legality of contraception. Well, what you just said is the response to that.
Yes.
Below that, in politics, conservative pro-life Catholics have adopted a contraception abortion distinction not so different from that of liberal Catholics circa 1968.
Yeah.
And then bottom of the page, Catholic pro-lifers have yet to respond with anything more than arguments from prudence or proportionality, arguments that their own principles otherwise tell them do not apply to intrinsic evils.
Yeah, I think he's so off here. I really do.
Yeah.
I agree. Nothing. No, there's nothing to be said. This is he's wrong.
Yeah. Also, and this is somewhat of a sidebar to a sidebar, maybe. I think it can be maintained, at least from some angle, some perspective, that contraception in some cases can be a more serious evil than abortion in this sense. If God calls people to married life and calls them to be fruitful and multiply, and they decide not to have any children at all by contracepting, there are children that God intended to exist that do not exist now. You kill an unborn child, that child exists and still has a chance for heaven, but you prevent what God intended a person to exist. I'm not saying this is an airtight, ironclad argument, but I think it's something that ought to be reflected on.
Well, it's just reflection. It's not a question of any teaching here. All we're doing is contemplating. But I mean, take for instance the persons you've just said. They get married, and then they choose throughout the whole of their married life not to have children, which and unless there's some very, the woman's going to die or something. I mean, if it's a selfish decision, it's a conscious, cynical, cold-blooded decision to avoid bringing the life that's intended to be brought by their union into the world against a woman who has been raped, completely wrecked, and what have you, and makes a reckless decision, which is morally wrong, right? Which is worse, the cold-blooded, cold-hearted decision to refuse life, or the woman in a state of shock and trauma who makes a reckless decision? The abortion is an absolute moral wrong. No one's disputing that. But there's this cold-hearted, cold-blooded refusal is more prideful, right?
Yes.
It's more prideful.
That's really a good way to put it, Joseph, actually.
And getting back to go ahead.
Yeah, more prideful. That is a really good way to put it. And I wish, that ought to be discussed more when we're charting venial and mortal sins and all these things. Well, how much pride was involved? Maybe that ought to be one of these criteria,
Yeah. And as you said earlier, Vivian, not every moral evil should be criminalized.
Right.
For example, sloth. I mean, or gluttony. It's hard to criminalize that, even though it's very dangerous, it's very harmful to society. And I think contraception. The societal consequences of contraception are enormous, but you can't. How do you legislate against that? You can't do it.
Look,
you need a moral authority, which
is the
church
old-fashioned idea of the taboo, right? Where something is just culturally and socially unacceptable, and people will still do it. It's not against the law, but the idea of the taboo, right? That basically to be doing what you're doing is outrageous, right? Like sleeping around in healthier times, right? No one's going to make it illegal. No one's going to say you're going to go to prison because you've been sleeping around, but you're a pig for doing it, right?
Actually, they just made a law.
The old-fashioned taboo.
Joseph, I'm not proving this, but Malaysia just made a law that it is criminal to sleep with someone not your wife, to have sex with someone not your wife.
Right. Well, I don't want to live in Malaysia, but anyway.
Well, I don't either.
But the point is well taken that there are a lot of absolutely morally reprehensible things that people do that are not illegal, and there are sound prudential reasons not to make those things illegal or to attempt to
who's going to decide how much food beyond which you are no longer feeding your appetite but being gluttonous, or how much drink no longer feeding your thirst but being gluttonous?
How about violating any of the first 3 of the 10 commandments?
Yes.
None of those are going to send you to jail, and those are the most important things of all.
Yeah.
Right.
Couple of things. One, well, I forget the one. I'll do the second one. The first one is that it's interesting how many scholars or thinkers or serious people have become Catholic because of the church's teaching against contraception,
Yes.
artificial contraception. I mean, Scott Hahn for one, and Kimberly, but there's many others. And then secondly, Joseph, you'll appreciate this. I was struck the first time I read That Hideous Strength, which is the third volume of Lewis's Space Trilogy, that the whole story really turns on the fact that the couple there, whose name I forget, had contracepted and not had a child, and that child was destined to be the one who's going to save England from this, this horrible invasion.
Jane and Mark Stoddart have a contraceptive marriage, and they were destined in Providence to actually give birth to the true king. And the moment has passed because
Wow.
the components not allowed to come together.
But I thought that was interesting that C.S. Lewis, who's not a he was a Catholic in many ways, but who was a Protestant, should make that point. He made it somewhat subtly, because I don't think people have spoken about that very often, if at all.
Right.
And yet it's the hinge upon which the whole story turns, basically.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And here, I've told this story on Formed Book Club before, but it bears repeating, I suppose, that I was this close to becoming a Catholic, and it was the teaching against contraception that was holding me back. And it was my husband-to-be who said, well, have you read Humanae Vitae? Maybe you should read it before you decide whether the church is right or wrong on this matter. And sure enough, I read it, and my eyes were opened. And so a lot of people have converted because of this, because the church is the only institution on earth who consistently, in season and out of season, teaches a consistent body of moral thought that all fits together like a clock. And until you really open your eyes and open your heart to paying attention to it, you just don't know that. And you're missing out big time.
That's a beautiful thought on which to conclude, which we will do, but we'll conclude this book, I believe, in our next session. After that, we're going to take up The Spirit of Liturgy by Joseph Karl Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI. So get your copy of The Spirit of Liturgy. I recommend this 40th anniversary edition that we did, re-edition for Ignatius Press. Commemorative edition, yeah. All right. Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, Vivian. Thanks to our audience. God bless you all.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Formed Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.